Good afternoon, and welcome to the second of three webinars in our NCBNP Financial Fluency series. I am Eugene Anderson, President CEO of ENA Strategies, and humbly happy to serve as the NCBNP Board Secretary. On behalf of our Chairman, Nicholas Wiggins, and the entire Board of Directors, we thank you for joining us on this day. The focus of today's webinar will be about chartering your course to the Chief Revenue Officer. The discussion will focus on how to use KIPs for revenue, learn what tools and techniques are useful for financial data, and communicating financial indicators with visuals, and much, much more. Please use the comment section to ask and submit your questions, and we will try to get to as many of those questions as possible at the conclusion of this presentation. I am now happy to introduce and welcome Mario Fairfund, Executive Director of Meet Chicago Northwest.
Well, thank you, Eugene, for that, and thank you for having us here today. We're a proud sponsor of this organization. I'm happy to be here to fill in for my associate and sales manager, Pamela Haley. Welcome to this. It's going to be a great event. And again, we're honored to be sponsors of this event and support this organization. So a little bit about Meet Chicago Northwest. We're a tourism association company that focuses on the outside of Chicago. So we're in the northwest suburbs. So for some of you who have never been out to the northwest suburbs of Chicago, there's a lot to offer. First of all, we're 15 minutes from O'Hare Airport. We have over 60 hotels ranging from 3, 4, 5-star hotels able to accommodate your meetings. So if you're interested to find out more information, reach out to me. I'm going to share a little bit a video right here in a moment, and I'll let Eugene roll that out. But if you're interested in finding out more, reach out to us, Mario Fairfund, Meet Chicago Northwest. And here's a little glimpse of a video that we have to share for all of you.
Discover a hidden gem in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. The perfect place to bring your team and meet your best self. From resort fun to world-class shopping, the options are endless. Where solid business meetings unfold, relationships flourish, and after-hours celebrations begin. Experience the perfect blend of work and family time on your business trip. Enjoy award-winning culinary experiences, create lasting memories, and unwind in style. We're on the edge of Chicago and in the middle of everything. Meet Chicago Northwest.
All right, thank you for the video. As you can see, some very cool spots there. Obviously, we have the chains. We have a lot of family-owned restaurants as well. Again, I grew up in Chicago, born and raised, but living out in the suburbs and northwest suburbs especially is not a difference. There's a lot to see here. So look forward to seeing you, some of you here. But I'm honored right now to introduce to you Tamara Blaylock. She's a Vice President of Cooperative Relations for the National Cooperative Business Association. I'm honored to meet her, and go ahead, take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mario. And I have to say that during my time at National Association of Wholesalers and Distributors, we had our most of our roundtables actually in Meet Chicago Northwest at one of the hotels very, very, very close to the airport. So happy that you are a sponsor with us today. Hello, everyone, and welcome for the session. Thank you for your interest in this. Thank you to the National Coalition of Black Meeting Professionals for inviting me on this topic. And let's go ahead and get started. So from business event strategist to chief revenue officer. So the first thing I want to get a sense from everyone in the group, and please answer me in the comment section, is how many people already had a plan to become a chief revenue officer, or how much of this is a new opportunity for you as it relates to your careers? So who wants to be a chief revenue officer, or who is just excited realizing that, yes, you can be a chief event officer? Let me know. The second thing, if you feel comfortable sharing, what's the range of how much money you want to make right now? So again, introducing myself, they gave me my name. I'm the Vice President of Cooperative Relations for the National Cooperative Business Association. My title is how the industry making cooperatives feel connected to what I do. I would say generally how my position works is I'm the Chief Revenue Officer, Chief Membership Officer, and the Chief Information Officer for my trade association. All right. So the skills and strategies needed for this position, but most importantly, what I want to get a sense of is that everyone feels welcome for this. So Eugene has agreed to be your surrogate as we navigate through this process. Definitely want this to be a dialogue. So as you have questions and comments, please share with that. So I've not yet heard from anyone who's excited to become a chief revenue officer or to share how much money that they want to make. But funny topic about how much money to make. When you look at the publication CEO Update, once a year, they post the highest paid non-CEOs in there, and people who fall within a chief revenue officer role among the top 200 highly paid executives in the trade association space, 501c6 space. The median salaries for them are between $375,000 to $600,000 a year. So, and thinking how much money you want to make, that is my starting point in that space. So Eugene, inviting you in here, and for people, particularly those who have been members of the coalition in that space, how often have you heard it proposed that when you are a business event strategist, that being a chief revenue officer is a very likely and probable place on your career path?
So thanks, Tamara, and I'm happy to act as the surrogate. Some of them on as I'm looking at some comments in the comments, they may not want me to be their surrogate, but it's too late. I am. I think one of the things that might level set us for this discussion is to help some of us with some of the terms that you're using. Helping with, what do you mean by chief revenue officer? And by the way, I can tell you how much I'd like to make, and Warren Buffett and I would be on the same level if I made what I would like to make. But I think that might help for the discussion.
Okay, very good. So you want to get that capital gains tax. I want to pay that capital gains tax as well. And that's safe. All right, excellent. So getting into the term, so really great question. Like, what is a chief revenue officer, and getting into those terms. So a term that we are very comfortable with is the business event strategist. And generally how it is framed for us is it focuses on the topics and the positions and responsibility that focus on the logistics and execution of an event. So it looking like as a producer, so essentially you are a producer, of this event, which is very similar to being a producer of a movie. And the producer is in charge of all the logistics, but the producer is also in charge of the revenue. And that's one thing in the budget. And that's one part of the business event strategist positions. However, it is structured from the assistant level to the director and VP level, that the revenue is always a part of it. Managing a budget is always a part of it. But when it's talked about, particularly for those of us in our community, the logistics and execution part has the most focus, and it decenters the part that deals with the budget. For a chief revenue officer, in that C-suite, like chief operating officer, chief financial officer, chief information officer, and then the chief revenue officer, the focus is the revenue. It's overseeing the revenue generation, business development, strategic operations. So again, using the metaphor of an executive producer for a TV show or a movie, they're charged for the whole part of it, the script, hiring the staff, hiring the production staff, hiring the actors, the screenwriters, all of that. They are also in charge of getting the financing so the film could be made, and also make the most money, as the movie makes the most money. So for example, the Beetlejuice movie that came out, it cost about $98 million to be for the production costs. And so far it has grossed over 300 million. So it has made, its money back. And the people who get the most of it are the executive producers. That's why they get the Oscars in the ceremonies. Again, going back to events and leading to a chief revenue officer, what they have in common, the executive producer, is essentially the firm control, not only of the budget and making the revenue for all the revenue generating entities for the organization. The same thing happens during the events when you are a business event strategist. It's just that how that can evolve, usually people don't take the time to unpack it, which is what's coming from this session. So how am I doing, Eugene? Is that making the terminology a bit more accessible for our audience?
Yeah, I think that helps tremendously. I just wanted to make sure that on the outset that we kind of level set, and obviously you were going in that direction. So thank you for that.
All right. So what's the relevance, to being a chief revenue officer or the CRO? It's crucial for driving business growth. And really it's that looking at what it takes to produce anything that causes revenue. For a lot of time, I'll be focusing on events because that's the part that we are the most familiar with. So you have an event, the goal for having the event, the primary goal, because even though a lot of us are a nonprofit corporation is the most important part. If there's no margin, there's no mission. More importantly, we don't get paid. Is to make the margin. And what is the margin? It's the expense. It's the revenue, gross revenue, minus the expenses. And what is left to the positive is called a margin, also a profit. So it's looking at that margin and what can we do to increase the margin, how much profit revenue that we're making without decreasing the quality or the experience. And that's true for anything that you are selling in the organization. The chief revenue officer not only does this for the events, but any revenue generating entity within the organization. That could be certifications, that could be membership. And if you have an exhibit hall, all of that. So every revenue generating entity. And that one of the most complicated revenue generating entities actually are events. So coming in as a business event strategist, that's why you are uniquely positioned to be able to ascend to a chief revenue officer from that. The biggest differences were we were focused on the business event strategist. Again, a lot of the centering when organizations talk about that role is again on the details of it, but not necessarily the big strategy, which is one, to make the revenue. And then secondly, how the event, whether it's education, networking, et cetera, for the organization benefits your members and your sponsors and exhibitors, if that's the case. So also looking at the impact, because the decision for how events are structured, how all your revenue generating products are structured, from the membership experience, the event experience, certification experience, the sponsorship experience, for that they are desirable and sticky, and structured in such a way that there are ways to be able to grow the revenue in every space. But you're doing that for all the revenue generating entities, not only just one type of revenue generating entity in the organization. But sometimes when you think about it that way, it doesn't seem attainable. It's very attainable. So again, looking at our events. So for example, my annual conference is next week. For that, we focus on the experience. Eugene, it's like, what are some thoughts that occur to you that are like strategic ways you think about the experience that, let's say, sponsors have an event? So what are like strategic ways we think about their experience and keeping them sponsors for your event?
Well, I personally think that when you're dealing with sponsors, the first and most important thing is that the event and the sponsor have mutually agreed upon expectations on what the outcomes are going to be. Because obviously a sponsor sponsors not merely out of the kindness of their heart. It's more out of what return on their investment are they going to get, and so making sure that you are creating an experience during the course of your event and our conference, whatever the activity is, that gives those sponsors the best opportunity to achieve their goals, to create a win-win situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a great example, using my conference. So a lot of the C-suite executives for our larger sponsors, they are big sports fans like I am in that space. And we also don't have an exhibit hall or any kind of exhibit opportunities at our conference. And also we don't have a staff that's dedicated for events. They are mostly membership focused, but we have enlarged that to apply to several things. So with not a lot of staff, definitely not a dedicated staff for those who are in exhibits, who have an exhibit hall and have a staff that focuses on that. We saw an opportunity where it increases their particularly feelings of ROI, because remember, everything is feeling based. So perception is reality, feelings, but also helping them with branding. And that for the rooms of our conference, we did naming rights the same way that baseball fields, football stadiums, and basketball arenas are named. And that actually caught on very well in that space, because now they take ownership of like what's in their room, that with what kind of programming is in there, what audience is in there, with the naming rights. And that is how we manage that space. But also it helps us go into our next point, which is portfolio. And a way that so many of us who are business event strategists need to reframe. So introducing a new term, and particularly a way for you to reframe what you're doing now, especially to get ready for a chief revenue officer position. And that is portfolio management. What's portfolio? All a portfolio is budget. Just like it's what you name, particularly having more than one budget, you will call them portfolios. So you're ensuring that the portfolio of your revenue generating ventures meets all the goals in financial returns. So for most of us who are in event management, unless it's only the annual conference, so your different portfolios you manage would be horizontal and not vertical in that space. It's looking at all the budgets that you manage as a portfolio. So Eugene, when's the first time that you thought about what you were managing financially, or the budgets that you were managing was actually encased in the portfolio?
So, for me, with the events that I manage and I do, and that I am the chief revenue officer. That's the starting point. The budget is the starting point. There's no event unless you have some sense of what your parameters are.
Right.
And those parameters start with the budget. And so once I know what that is, the second thing with that, and I guess really it goes hand in hand, is to understand what is the objective, what are the goals of that activity. If it's a senior leadership meeting, what are we trying to come away with? If it's a membership meeting, what do we want to walk away? What do we want our attendees to walk away with? And then from that, then building the structure, the budget, the portfolio, if you will, to ensure you meet that.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's an excellent way to come into this and reframe that. So one thing I do want everyone to start doing is when you look at on your resume and on your LinkedIn is to start talking about the businesses that you're managing, the revenue generating entities as portfolios. So it's like, what does your portfolio look like? So if let's say you are managing 10 events at your organization, so your portfolio, you could say 10 events, but we're talking revenue. We want to take what we are doing and we want to quantify it, because as you get to senior positions, they are less concerned with any numerical detail that doesn't deal with dollars, not even cents, just doesn't deal with thousands or millions, right? It's like that is the focus they're in, thousands and millions. So if you have 10 events, 10 is fine. It's what's the overall size of your portfolio, and that's the gross revenues. That's before you do any deductions of that. So it could be 10 events, it could be 5, it could be 1. But if that one event gross revenue is $20 million, you're managing a $20 million portfolio. If you're managing 10 events, they generate $30 million, $5 million. If you're just starting out, it might be in the hundreds of thousands in that space, but that's the size of the portfolio that you're managing. And when you look at it that way, you're realizing that you are operating a chief revenue officer, because that is the size of your portfolio in that space. And that switching to that type of terminology expands how people perceive you, but also how you perceive yourself. Because when you realize you were managing really powerful and abundance of assets in that space. If you have, $5 million, $10 million of revenue that you're generating, that is a sizable portfolio. That's very impressive. And if this is the first time you're having that realization, I want to celebrate you, because you are already in a chief revenue officer space. It's more having someone open your eyes to that reality in that space. So yes, that is where that is. It's portfolio. So it's looking at your portfolio. Difference between business event strategist and chief revenue officer. Chief revenue officer roles are talking about portfolio. So size of all the businesses that you're doing. If they're in different streams, then the portfolios will change. So like membership might be $10 million. The events might be, $12 million. The certification could be $5 million. And those are 3 different portfolios, but combined, doing quick math, it's $27 million. So the size of all your portfolios is $27 million. That's what you're managing. And that's how they view and talk about chief revenue officers, is the size of all of the financial assets that you're managing. And that is judged by their gross revenue, not at all their expenses in that space. So that is where we are there. So pathway to that for most people, it's particularly if you're in events, what you're looking for is, one, you're going to work up that events level, depending on how it is in your organization. It may stop at director, it may stop at VP. There could even be a chief experience officer. That's the path there. If it stops earlier on, then you start looking at the other revenue generating positions, whatever they're called. It could be membership. It could be a number of things in that space. And that's how you build a ladder. to chief revenue officer on that space. And in a lot of organizations, that position can have different titles in there. So some organizations are title heavy, so they may go as far as VP. And then for other organizations, they may use chief level. It could be managing director on that space. But what you're looking for are those who are in charge of the revenue generating assets for the organization. And generally, when you start to look at these job descriptions, I think you're going to start to see more now that they use the portfolio language or have experience managing $10 million, $20 million, or budgets of that space in there. So one thing I do want us to start doing right away is to rechange our resumes, evolve the language in our resumes and on our LinkedIn to talk about the portfolio, the books of business that we are currently managing now, and then start to go back in all of our work experience and start to calculate that and move that forward. Eugene, what are different titles you've seen either on the VP or C-suite level of people who are managing revenue, but they may not call it Chief Revenue Officer?
Yeah, I think that's I was sitting here making some notes, Duchess.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things in the comment section, as I've been gazing over at it, I think this is a paradigm shift for a lot of people because our titles have been given to us, if you will, and have been somewhat restrictive in terms of our ability for upward mobility in particular. And so some of these titles that you are referring to, for the most part, have been, if you will, kept at the C-suite level. Mm-hmm. When you start talking about strategists in terms of a role that is either sales oriented or execution oriented, we normally aren't given that opportunity. And I think one of the key things that would be of interest to this group is how do we help reframe that in our particular organizations? How do we get that job description? And as an example, for me, there was a point in my career where I just simply wrote my own job description and sent it to HR and said, this is what I believe my job description should be and my title should be. And so would you recommend something like that to those who are joining us on this call, that maybe that's something they should think about?
In pathway planning, absolutely. So I will get to that, because I will say that for us, generally the chief revenue officer, where I've seen it the most, is in larger organizations. So at least where there is a staff on the ground of 60 people or more. What I've noticed where you see that position. I would say another place where the chief revenue officer is hiding is in the chief strategy officer position, or sometimes it is fused with the chief operating officer. So if you don't see that, it is there. However, I love what Eugene has brought up, is that also it's time for a lot of our titles and things to evolve. So a recommendation, particularly if you found an org that is healthy and appreciates you, and is not on the news for anything negative, it could be that their imaginations, are on pause, and that this concept needs to be introduced. So definitely, if you found the place that you want to be, you don't necessarily have to go chasing the title. It's very likely it's a culture that builds from within, and you start making these opportunities for yourself, with the understanding that when you take on senior roles, it will include more responsibilities. So it's not necessarily siloed, but it will need to include everything revenue generating. Or let's say there's already like a chief membership officer. I think it's getting with that person and deciding, which revenue generating entities will be with that position. Let's say you're creating a chief experience officer. So like what parts would be considered membership and what is considered part of the experience in that place. So that is actually a very, very, very great point that you made. So go over a couple things really quickly. Then I see there's some questions, and we will hit those. So for a business event strategist role, so let's say you're an event strategist, that could be director of events, event coordinator. There are so many ways that titles are used in our industry. So your key point is like you're leveraging your event management skills, but start to focus on the ways that you are driving revenue growth, whether it's sponsorship deals, enhancing customer engagement, having add-ons to that, having different packages for the experience. All of that are strategic revenue generating decisions. So look at the ways that you have been able to increase revenue. It could be incrementally, particularly if you're a professional society and you're dealing with individuals. So there generally has to be more creativity because you are dealing with varying budget sizes when your member base are the individual professionals and not necessarily the organization. So like look at all the different ways that you are generating revenue. So touching on Maisha's question, like if like an event or a festival, it could be that you found that with some of the sponsors or those who have booths, you've been able to get revenue in certain spaces. So you might find one part of the area or the festival where you're able to drive revenue with the booth sponsors, but maybe not as much with the F&B, because with particularly the price of food inflation, that might have made that part of the budget flatter. So the best result might be that the food part did make into a negative. If you are doing like a large scale like community events and festivals, I would start to look at the event, the festival as a portfolio, and each line of revenue to look at it as a horizontal, as its own individual revenue stream. So rather than looking at the festival as a whole, if booth revenue went up, but let's say food and beverage stayed flat, then you would focus on those individual contributors to level your success, because success for something like a festival or community event is different. So you would look at the portfolio as a festival and each revenue generating entity like as its own revenue goal rather than the entity as a whole, because there might be some areas where not a lot of revenue can be driven and you don't want to minimize the areas that you've been able to increase revenue, as an example. Getting into, for those of us who are on the sales side, I actually came up to the sales side, shocker, there for a lot of people. If you are in a CSM role with a hotel or convention center, or you're directly a sales role in that space, your relation to revenue is more direct because you have a sales goal. It might be a softer sales goal if you are a CSM. However, look at those areas where you're able to increase revenue in that space. It's the add-ons, or that it's not necessarily the add-ons are there only to drive revenue, but it could be to improve the experience. So I just had a tech call earlier this morning, and the recommendation they made was how to use timers and who needed a confidence monitor. Did that increase my AV budget? Sure. But it also is going to increase the experience not only for those receiving information from the speakers, but also for the speakers who are delivering that. So all of those ways of doing that are super, super important. And then getting to the last one that we have here is also looking at the different ways that the decisions that you're making are increasing the company revenue. So it could be that a lot of times in our positions, the way that decisions are made is that it involves partnership with other parts of the organization. One, we take group opportunity. Success has many parents. You need to make sure that you are leveraging those successes that are there. But a lot of times it does involve partnership with other divisions in that space. I know, like, for example, events and education, events and membership, generally there might be some revenue entities that are shared in terms of contributing to it, because it has to be a partnership with two different divisions of the organization. So it's looking at where you are influencing, implementing any type of decision that is increasing the revenue for your portfolios and getting to that space. So we're going to take a break from the PowerPoint. I see there are more questions, and Eugene and I are going to do that together. So getting to
I think there's a question. I think there's a question. I'm sorry. I think there's a question about, do you have any tips for how event strategists can get insight about other revenue centers outside their immediate portfolio to grow their knowledge of revenue management growth outside events or outside your comfort zone? Your thoughts?
Oh, that is a great question. So for those of us who are in 501c6s, which are the professional societies and trade associations, or the 501c3s, and that you have a great tool that will help you realize how you are influencing revenue. And that is called the 990. The 990 is the tax filing for nonprofits. That's part of the deal for being a nonprofit. There's some taxes you don't have to pay. And you know what? You have to share your taxes with everybody. It is free information. One of the things that you learn in a 990, well, one of them, you also learn the salaries for the highest paid executives. That's how CEO Update gets that data. Second, which for those, particularly those who are applying for jobs, even if the job that you're applying for isn't there, you just get a sense of what compensation is to make sure that you are advocating for the best. Second thing that you learn are the different revenue streams of the organization and where that is. And that helps you to get a sense about the revenue centers that are outside your immediate portfolio and how they're defined by the organization. So often you see membership, events, programs. A lot of time anything can be viewed together, particularly if programs involve events and, let's say, a certification and educational events that are there. If you have exhibits, that can be placed in a variety of places as well. So that gives you a sense of how the organization thinks about what its revenue centers are. Generally, you can start to identify who has the chief responsibility to it by the highest titled entity that's not a CEO or executive director. And generally they have budget responsibilities, and it's okay. And you definitely are welcome, and they should welcome this, a conversation of like who ultimately has responsibility for that. So if you have an all staff meeting, that's a great question to pitch to them about how that works. And then you have a better understanding of where you fit in driving on the portfolio. So even if you're one member of a team of, let's say, 20 people, but you consider 3 different divisions for your event, particularly events and membership are strongly aligned, because that's generally why a lot of people are members, especially if you have certification. That starts to help you understand, looking at the 990s, you have about a sense of how much revenue there is in that budget, and how many portfolios you are having influence on in that space. How does that sound to you, Eugene? Does that sound like?
I mean, I think that gets to it. I think the other thing that you brought out in this is many people don't understand, and you correctly identified. I mean, everybody thinks of nonprofits, they immediately think of 501c3s. There are a number of different 501c something, C6, C7, C8. They're different, and so understanding, and sometimes we have to do that independent research to understand, because if you go to the 990, so every organization, 990s are only filled out by organizations that reach a certain revenue goal. And because there's another for those who are under that $100,000, they don't fill out a 990. They don't need as much information. But I think you're dead on. The other thing that I thought of in this is particular the question being outside of your comfort zone, is one of the things that I try to do is when I'm at conferences to attend sessions that aren't necessarily directly related to me. because that's where you learn. And then also having those conversations with folks in different organizations that may do similar things than you do.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. Definitely, those are questions to ask. And then particularly when you're attending conferences, to make sure, as I tell my team, that's how you build your squad. Just like bosses like me, sadly, are few and far between. And just making sure that you are teaching and sharing with them. It's like generally what I learn and who I learned from are like building your squad. And I've met most of them at one of two different association industry events, and that's how I meet them and inform them, and we share information with each other. And that's how I learned so many skills. That's how I learned about new tech and things like that are coming out. Another term that was asked in that question, I do want to make sure you get, do ask questions anytime you run across a phrase or a word that like is new to you. And one is, for example, P&L. P&L stands for profit and loss. So again, that's another way to talk about budgets. So they may use the term P&L. Another one you'll hear, particularly for those, even if they didn't get their MBA, they read a business book, they start talking about EBITDA all the time, like EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and adjustments. So that's what that is. Essentially, net margin, gross revenue, most of the expenses, net margin. Net margin is essentially EBITDA. Like that's all that is. But EBITDA makes them feel better about themselves.
Sounds great. It sounds great.
Sounds great. It's net margin. It's straight subtraction. That's all it is. Simple subtraction. That's what that number is. But P&L is profit and loss. So what a major thing that happens. So I think a great example for this is pricing of sponsorships. And the thing that the people who price sponsorships don't talk about a lot. So let's say the goal of the sponsorship is to make, for those, well, I get mine. I spent some time working in the NFL, so I get my sense of sponsorship pricing from the sports world. The goal is the worst case scenario to make at least 40% net margin or EBITDA on the sponsorship. And what people look at in terms of the expenses is like how much it takes to put on the event. And they look at all the direct expenses that you pay to vendors or suppliers. The number one expense a lot of people forget about, and actually the largest expense on any company or 501c6 403's budget are human. The human resource is the most expensive item, as it should be. People matter. At least, but not to the US tax code, conversation for another time. However, people are very important. People are worth a large investment in that space. So when you're pricing things, yes, you have to price all the overhead expenses to go to the vendors, but you also have to include the salary, the portion of the salary that goes to actualizing that sponsorship. And after you add that, then you start to get your net margin. So the number one mistake people make in pricing for margins on sponsorship is forgetting to include, again, the P&L, profits and loss, and the big number that's on a P&L statement. It always considers how expensive employees are that you're paying for that time. Then what's left truly is your net margin. So what a P&L introduces is how important labor is to delivering your output. So make sure that you are pricing things that you're able to cover your labor, and then you truly have excess in organization to invest in other things. That includes pay raises, that includes additional staff, that includes better tech to support that. You have to make sure in everything that you're doing. So now, we're thinking about our portfolios that we're managing, make sure we're including the labor expense at the very least ourselves, and like everybody on our team. Having served on boards, how often, Eugene, have you experienced people forget that very, very, very important overhead expense of labor?
Oh, every day. I mean, I serve on a number of different boards, and that's the big thing they forget. And I think when you're talking about sponsorships and it's great that experience you got with the NFL taught you that important piece. But I think the other thing is going into that, is understanding what the value of your portfolio is before you even offer a sponsorship.
Yes.
Sponsorships, you need to create a win-win situation for your organization and for the sponsor, but that doesn't mean giving the house away to the sponsor, so that all of a sudden it's a lose win. They win and you lose.
Mm-hmm.
And they, sponsors know that they're giving you the dollars and that you're using some of that for the purposes of putting on your event or growing your EBITDA, if you will. So don't sit there and think you have to give them everything. It's a dance. That's how I look at it. Let's dance. Let's dance, ESPN. Let's talk about what you can give us and what we can give you. But yeah, and nonprofit boards are notorious for giving the house away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For those who are football fans, it's the difference between having an offensive line to protect your quarterback, as the Washington Commanders did with Jaden Daniels, and what the Chicago Bears have not yet done for Caleb Williams.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
If we can have our slides back, we're going to go quickly into how we can practice.
About a couple more minutes.
So we're going to go through this really quickly. So identifying transferable skills. So again, project management, negotiation, and strategic planning. And I know they'll make these slides available to you. So how do you get there? We were talking about volunteer leadership is the best place to practice and get these skills. Also, they need to be on your LinkedIn and on your resume. So serving as a treasurer for a volunteer board of directors, that includes homeowners associations. Most homeowners associations are 501c7s or 8s or 9s, going down that role. Sales, for those who are open to adding challenge to your job. But I will say this, one thing I always say when I talk to, go back to my university and talk about nonprofits, generally the closer you are to having direct responsibility for building revenue for an organization, the more money you tend to make, unless you are in finance or IT. The less direct responsibility you have to generating revenue, the less money you tend to make. So adding sales goals to your job also increases your base salary by a lot, because you are very instrumental to bringing revenue into the organization. If that feels like a dramatic change, volunteering for any type of foundation or fundraising entity is a great way to learn sales and business acumen. And teaching you all a secret, which I don't likely do, is that every decision we make is emotional. Sales is an emotional decision. Think about how you bought your last car. If you try to say that you've logicked your way through that, you are not telling the truth. Generally, it was an emotional decision. Sales works the same way. It's finding that emotional connection that makes you want to exchange the money over for that emotional fulfillment. That's what sales is from that space. Same thing with operations. It's like you want to get a sense of how all the things that contribute to generating more money and the responsibility and what it takes to manage all of that is there. And so volunteerism is the best way to do that. So during CRO, the most important things that we have here, one, portfolio management. Portfolio management is how we talk about budgets, but we no longer manage budgets. We now manage portfolios. Second, you're a margin warrior, or, they like to say EBITDA. So you want to make sure that you take all of your revenue and the expenses, and that you're looking at that margin and how are you increasing that margin? And you may look at it, it's like, I only increased it 3%. For a lot of entities, 3% is a lot. For a lot of grocery store margins, for example, they are between like 3 to 8% in margin growth. And that is seen as huge success. New restaurants, my goodness, it's like under 10%. So even if you have a single digit of expense, of increase in your margin, that's phenomenal. But another way to look at it is going back to the festival. If you're able to grow one particular revenue entity by, 35%, the whole event might have been 5%, but you grew one entity by 35%. That is a very substantial success. So look at it that way. Team leadership is very important, because if you are a chief revenue officer, you are managing a whole division Unfortunately, we spend 60% of our adult lives at work in America. Boo. So we need to make sure that we make that experience as empowering as possible. So your boss is 90% responsible for whether you like, love, loathe, or tolerate your job. When you are senior leadership, you create the culture. So you are directly responsible for whether people like, love, loathe, or tolerate that culture. So wanting to be that team leadership, creating an empowering experience for those you directly manage, but also for who they directly manage, is your responsibility. Volunteer leadership is a great way to practice that and learn the ways where you may need to evolve or strengthen that in you. Personal brand management. Chief Revenue Officer, you're continually in sales. That's why I say yes to opportunities to do this presentation, because again, you have to keep your brand up. LinkedIn is a great way to do it. So are Instagram and TikTok, as long as the government keep TikTok legal. So you want to look at ways to have your brand managed, to enlarge your brand management, decide who your brand is. Last and not least, anyone who knows me knows that mentorship, it's not for us. That's giving advice. We can read, we can listen to podcasts. We want sponsors. What's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor? A mentor really only has to give you advice. I view that as passive. A sponsor acts on your behalf. They get you speaking opportunities. They talk about you in rooms they're in. They get you interviews. They get you on boards of directors in that space. So you want to recruit a lot of sponsors. And how do you recruit sponsors? Same way you recruit mentors. They don't realize you're doing it. So you meet up with them, you find a good connection. Then it's like, you know what? Let's meet up again in 2 months. Let's meet once a quarter. And then you start making asks, and then soon you find that you have a sponsor. But a sponsor is just like anything else. One will not do. Again, going to the analogy of a football team, there's a head coach. So you may have your favorite sponsor, but you're going to need a defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, quarterback coach, line coach. You see where we're going? You're going to need all kinds of sponsors to get you there, because gatekeeping for any C-suite role is very, very, very tough. And you need several entry points in to do that. Absolutely. You definitely need that. But you know who I hope doesn't improve their sponsorship? That's the Cincinnati Bengals, because I am a Baltimore Ravens fan. So you all continue to lose. I am very excited at the 0-3 start. But again, bringing you back in, Eugene, and you can also take the slide off from that. The journey to the CRO with the portfolio management, recruiting of sponsors in that space, and also starting to volunteering to strengthen their skills. Does that feel like an accessible journey to get our business event strategists to the Chief Revenue Officer level?
Absolutely. Let's thank Tamala for this tremendous presentation. And I took away just a couple of words that terms that I want everybody to remember: portfolio, assets, business event strategists, build business acumen, and that EBITDA, that one word that I used to sit in meetings and go, why are we talking about it again? But it's very critical. I want to take this opportunity also to give our Duchess of Success her flowers. She celebrated her birthday yesterday, so thank you for. And she celebrates all month, everyone, as she told us. So thank you for taking a little time with us this afternoon and celebrating part of your birthday with us. I hope everyone on this webinar found it to be useful and that you learned something. So I want to thank all of you for attending and make sure that you attend our third and final session, which will which will take place next week on October the 1st. Additionally, don't forget, I'm a board member. I'm on a board of a not-for-profit. Don't forget to register for our 41st annual conference that will be held November the 13th through the 16th in Birmingham, Alabama. You can find more information at ncbmp.com. Thank you to our sponsors, our key sponsor for today, Meet Chicago Northwest, Flock Theory, and MPI. Everyone, have a great day.